The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, very good. Amanda, are you still there? Can you hear me?
I am.
Excellent. All right, we are on air. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Introduction to the Health and Retirement Study, developed and presented by the University of Michigan with funds from the National Institute on Aging and hosted by GSA. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the GSA website. A notice to all attendees will be distributed once the recording is available. A question and answer session will immediately follow part 1 and part 2 of the live presentation. We will be accepting questions through the questions feature accessible on the GoToWebinar panel. Also located there is one downloadable handout for today, the Cohort Profile paper. While I introduce our speaker today, please tell us who you are by answering the poll that appears on your screen. I hope you see that now. Our speaker, Dr. Amanda Soniga, Associate Research Scientist in the Survey Research Center of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, where she is responsible for integrating communication, outreach, and education efforts for the Health and Retirement Study. She received her PhD through the Department of Health, Behavior, and Society at the Johns Hopkins University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship within the ISR program in Social Environment and Health. She has lectured in the UM School of Public Health, teaching psychosocial factors and health-related behavior. Her research focuses on life course trajectories of physical and mental health, institutional and personal factors associated with vulnerability and resilience in aging individuals, and work transitions and their broad effects on health and well-being. Thank you, Amanda, for bringing us this important program. So, okay, let's close the poll now and show the results. It looks like 82% of the audience is from academia, 3% from industry, 4% from government, 2% from medical practice, and 9% other. I wonder if you can see that now. Okay, well, without further delay, I'll hand the microphone to Amanda.
Well, thank you for joining us today for the webinar that will provide a brief overview about the Health and Retirement Study, or the HRS. So in the time I have today with you, I'm just going to offer what I call the view from 38,000 feet. And the topics I'm going to present very quickly here are also covered pretty well in the Cohort Profile paper, at least in part 1 of this presentation, covered in the Cohort Profile paper, which, as Judy mentioned, GSA has provided. So we'll begin with a bit of history about the HRS and then describe its essential design. In 1990, Congress directed the National Institute on Aging to create a new study to inform policy discussions about health and retirement in anticipation of the baby boom generation entering retirement. The Health and Retirement Study, HRS, became the first nationally representative longitudinal study of older people that included both detailed economic and health information in the same survey. So there had been surveys of economic behavior and surveys of health, of course, but this was the first longitudinal survey that included both. We first had Tom Juster as director, then Bob Willis, now David Weir. We have 18 co-investigators from around the country that represent the range of disciplines. So HRS is highly multidisciplinary, and that's informed by our multidisciplinary group of co-investigators. In the ensuing years, HRS has grown to become the largest and most comprehensive longitudinal study of Americans over age 50. And we're funded by the National Institute on Aging with substantial co-funding from the Social Security Administration. So HRS is a large and complex study, but the basic design is a study that's nationally representative of the population over age 50. And if participants are partnered, we also attempt to enroll their spouse or partner who can be of any age. We follow individuals and their spouse or partner every 2 years from the time of their entry into the survey until their death. We also introduce a new 6-year birth cohort of participants every 6 years to keep the sample nationally representative of the population over age 50. So we do a sample refresh every 6 years. And at any given wave, we have about 20,000 respondents, and that varies wave to wave. To date, more than 38,000 respondents have been enrolled in the study. Now I want to describe for you how the HRS sample has been built up over time. So this graphic depicts the longitudinal cohort sample design of HRS. The initial 1992 cohort, which we call the HRS cohort, included men and women born 1931 to 1941 who were at the time in 92 aged 51 to 61. So individuals in this first cohort, the HRS cohort, who are now in their 70s and 80s, have been interviewed every 2 years since 1992. The asset and health dynamics among the oldest old, or AHEAD, was added in 1993 and captured the cohort born before 1924, who were then 70 and older. Then in 1998, the two studies merged, and 2 new cohorts were enrolled to bridge the age gaps. These birth cohorts are the Children of the Depression, or CODA, for those born 1924 to 1930, and the War Babies for those born 1942 to 1947. Now we employ a steady state design, as I mentioned, where we refresh the sample every 6 years with younger cohorts. So in 2004, we added the early baby boomers who were born 1948 to 1953. And in 2010, we added the mid-baby boomers who were born 1954 to 1959. And in 2016, we enrolled the late baby boomers, the last of the baby boomers, who were born 1960 to 1965. Okay. So this table shows the baseline and re-interview response rates across 10 waves of data collection through 2010 for 5 of the 6 HRS cohorts. Looking down this first column, you can see that initial response rates have declined over time following a general national trend. There's, I think, a bit of survey fatigue, so response rates are generally trending downward over time. Whereas re-interview response rates have remained high across all follow-up waves, as shown here in the first row for the original cohort and in rows below for other cohorts. So even when baseline rates were relatively low, follow-up rates have remained very high, and these rates are very similar for recent waves. Now I want to describe some important aspects of the mode of data collection for the core interview, which is the baseline and follow-up interview administered to all HRS respondents every 2 years that I just showed you. So what I'm going to refer to as the core is the main interview that we do every 2 years on all respondents. From the beginning of the study through 2004, this baseline core interview was conducted face-to-face in respondents' homes, with follow-up interviews conducted by telephone, unless a participant was over age 80, in which case the follow-up interview could also be face-to-face. Over the years, interest grew in obtaining physical measures that had to be done in person. So since 2006, HRS has used a mixed mode design in which half of the core sample is randomly assigned to a face-to-face core interview that's enhanced with physical and biological measures and a psychosocial questionnaire, and the other half is assigned to a telephone core-only interview. So this is one of the harder things for people to understand, so I'm going to explain to you in more depth about this enhanced face-to-face interview. This graphic depicts the design of the enhanced face-to-face interview. A indicates the first random half sample that was assigned to the enhanced face-to-face in 2006. B indicates the other half of the core sample that did not get the enhanced face-to-face interview in 2006, but did get it in 2008. The half samples then alternate waves so that A has the enhanced interview again in 2010, and B gets it again in 2012, and so on. This means that while core survey data are available every wave on the full sample, the physical, biomarker, and psychosocial measures are available every wave on only half of the full core sample, either A or B. Another implication of this design is that longitudinal information from the enhanced face-to-face interview is available at 4-year instead of 2-year intervals. So again, biomarker, physical measure, and psychosocial longitudinal data are available every 4 years. Now I want to turn to the study content more generally. First, I'll provide a broad overview of the major parts of the study, then a bit of detail on each. As I said, the core interview takes place every 2 years in person or by telephone. The interview takes about 1.5 to 3 hours to complete and constitutes the bulk of the data HRS collects. The sample size for any given wave varies from about 18,000 to as high as 23,000 respondents. In addition to the core interview, every wave includes 10 or so 3-minute experimental modules on various topics. These modules occur at the end of the core interview, and a random subsample of about 1,500 respondents is assigned to each of these modules. As I just mentioned, every wave also collects physical measures, biomarkers, genetics, and psychosocial data for half of the core sample. We also conduct off-year studies with subsamples of 3,000 to 7,000 respondents. Data from these off-year studies can be linked to the core data. Lastly, HRS data are also linked to several external sources of administrative data, which we'll talk about in a moment. The core HRS survey, which is administered, again, to all respondents, collects information on a range of factors related to well-being among older adults. I'll let you read through the detail, but the broad topic areas are health, health services, labor force participation, economic status, family structure, subjective expectations, and the 3-minute experimental modules, which either probe in more depth on a core survey topic or gather information that's not in the core. For respondents who are deceased, HRS also conducts an exit interview on the disposition of their assets and information on any advance directives. As part of the face-to-face interview, interviewers administer physical tests and obtain biological specimens. The physical measures include grip strength, timed walk, lung function, balance, height and weight, waist circumference, and blood pressure. Saliva is obtained for DNA extraction, and blood is used to measure biomarkers. Finally, respondents are given a self-administered questionnaire on psychosocial functioning that's left with them to complete on their own and mail back to us. I'm going to note here that we just finished conducting a collection of venous blood as part of the core data collection. So the biomarkers to date have been drawn from dried blood spots. We're collecting venous blood now, and these data will be available in the summer of 2018. Among other things, these data will allow us to generate the first ever population data on important markers of immune function and inflammation. The off-year studies are administered during years when the core survey is not in the field, and they collect a range of information in a variety of modes. For example, the Aging Demographics and Memory Study, or ADAMS, is an in-home clinical interview designed to provide diagnostic information on Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Other off-year studies are mail surveys, such as those shown here on a variety of topics. The Consumption and Activities Mail Survey is an ongoing biennial survey that tracks changes in spending and activities throughout retirement. We also have web-based internet surveys every 2 years on a wide range of topics. As I mentioned, the core data are also linked at the individual level to different sources of administrative information. We have links to Social Security Administration earnings and benefit records, to Medicare and Medicaid claims information, and to the Veterans Administration. At the employer level, information on employer-provided pension plans is obtained for businesses where respondents have worked. Also, a linkage to the Census Bureau Business Register is underway. These linkages provide validation of self-reported information, but also additional information that we either don't or can't collect in the survey. Okay, so lastly, in an aging world, HRS has become the model for more than 20 sister studies, what we call sister studies, all around the world. These studies are harmonized with the HRS in terms of the study design and the survey content, which makes cross-national comparisons possible. And researchers at the University of Southern California have developed a tool for helping you create cross-national files for comparative analysis. The project is called the Gateway to Global Aging and can be accessed at g2aging.org. So there's lots of help for using the data. At the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research, where the study is housed, we have a week-long data training workshop as part of the ISR Summer Institute. We also have pre-conference workshops at academic conferences, primarily at GSA. We have the HRS conference exhibit, which is at about 7 or 8 different professional association conferences every year. And we have a really helpful help desk. You can sign up to receive our user newsletter, which goes out by email about 3 times per year, and that's at the bottom panel of the home page. So that's it for the overview, and now I believe I would be glad to take some questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda. Yep, so we are moving along to our first question and answer session. Just a reminder, you can type and send questions using the questions feature in the dashboard accessible on the right-hand side of your screen. We will not be using the raised hand feature today. So if you have a question, please be sure to use the questions panel. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible, time permitting, during this part of the webinar. All right. Okay, I've got a couple of questions in here. Let me try to get to this first one here.
Right.
Will the slides be made available? Yes, they will be posted on the GSA website following this program. Here's one. How were participants selected to ensure the sample was representative of the U.S. population age 50 and over?
So that's a great question. We use the Institute for Social Research maintains a national sample frame that's developed and actually was developed 40, 50 years ago and continues to be updated so that it's up to date. But we use the ISR sample frame. And then we have a multi-step procedure for identifying people to contact involving so-called primary sampling units and then metropolitan statistical units at the metropolitan level, because obviously most people are in major metropolitan areas. You know, so one implication of that is that we might only even have, 100 respondents total in Idaho. So that's why, for example, you would see that state level information is restricted data. And then an interesting implication is that or part of our sampling procedure is that we do what's called block listing. So you can imagine if we did sort of a random scattershot of a whole metropolitan area, that would be terribly expensive sending interviewers, because recall that we do go in-home for the very first interview. So rather than sending them just completely all over the city, we do block listing. So we randomly sample blocks then, and then interview people randomly on a particular block. So this is part of why, and then there's other sampling issues. We oversample African Americans and Hispanics, And so then this is why there is weights that are applied, and why you need to do procedures for correcting the standard errors, particularly in epidemiologic research, where you're trying to obtain estimates of, say, prevalence of disease or something like that, because we have this sampling and clustering, stratification, and then clustering of the data that has to be adjusted for. But then at the doorstep, the interviewer goes and asks, rings the doorbell and asks the person who answers, is there somebody living here who's over age 50? And if that person is there, we try to interview them, or ask them to participate. And then if they have a spouse or a partner, we enroll that spouse or partner as well. And so an important implication of that you should realize when you download the data is that the weight then applies to that. The person who's over age 50 is the person who's sampled. The spouse or partner is brought along, but are not sampled. So they don't have weights. And what else do I want to say? Oh, that spouse or partner can be of any age. So when you first download the data and say you did a frequency distribution of age, you're going to see some people in the data set who are 25, 26, 27 years old, and those are spouses. Okay, I hope that answers.
Great. I have another one here. What is the lag time between data collection and publication? For example, in what year does the data for each year become available?
Yeah, so HRS has prided itself over the years in very quick release of the data. I think, we're usually in the field. Our goal is to not be in the field, more than 10 months. And then we aim to have the data released at least, we do 2 releases. We do what's called an early release and then a final release. And we aim for that early release to be 3 to 4 months after we're out of the field. And then the final release is usually 6 or 7 months later. So that's about the lag time. Sometimes it's a little longer, but hopefully not, not too much.
Excellent. Another question, are there longitudinal satisfaction questions?
Yes. Yes, so we have life satisfaction. Actually, I'm not sure if there might be a one-item life satisfaction in the core, but for sure there's life satisfaction that's part of the psychosocial data that I mentioned that's collected as part of that enhanced face-to-face interview. So the important thing to note about that is that it is available longitudinally only every 4 years, again, because of that design, that mixed mode design. Another thing I will point out, because I realize I don't mention it in part 2, but that because that psychosocial questionnaire is left with participants at the end of the enhanced face-to-face interview, it kind of got the unfortunate moniker of leave behind. So our PI, Jackie Smith, who for the psychosocial section, doesn't like that, but I'm afraid it's here to stay because it's known as section LB. So later on, when I show you the questionnaire sections, the psychosocial data are in section LB for leave behind, and you can look through there for life satisfaction and well-being. There's measures of well-being and quite a few different things that measure well-being.
All right. Can you please talk about healthcare survey, the part about the healthcare survey? What is included here? Providers, caregivers, specialists, healthcare provider team? Is this good for studying healthcare systems and decision making?
So the core interview contains some information on utilization of health services, but I think this, I'm going to guess that the question refers more to what was known as the health, one of the off-year studies that I talked about. So these are studies that are conducted in the year off of the main core survey field period. And there was one called the Healthcare Mail Survey. And I think there is more detailed information there. I'm not familiar right away. I can certainly get back to you with more about that. But there is much more detailed information in there about utilization of healthcare and health insurance. And there, I believe there's also information in the web, the internet surveys on healthcare utilization. So, you know, it's a good source. It's not, I'm sure there are better sources, particularly on healthcare utilization. The great asset of the HRS is that it's not necessarily your definitive source for any one of these topics, but because it's so multidisciplinary, you have the opportunity to combine so many different disciplinary areas. So again, not your definitive source for healthcare utilization, but if you're interested in combining some information on healthcare utilization with economic information, you know, well-being, these are the kinds of things the HRS is for you. But I can help more if you get in touch with me about that.
Great. Amanda, what do you think about just one more question before we shift to part 2?
That sounds great.
Okay, here's one. Are blood micronutrient concentrations measured?
Good question. I do think, yes, in the venous blood study, not in the dried blood spots, the biomarkers that were available when we were just obtaining dried blood spots, I think are only 5. I think, I'm not going to name them all off the top of my head, but it's like cholesterol, cystatin A, HbA1c, I forget what the other one is. But yes, now with venous blood, we have dozens of things that are assays that are done that are going to be available. And I'm pretty sure micronutrients, I know that nutrition is a really growing and important topic. Pretty sure micronutrients are in that. Let me point out to you under documentation, documentation link on the website, which we're going to be talking about in a second here. There is a link to user guides, and under user guides there is a under health information, the subsection for health, there is a user guide on venous blood, on the venous blood collection, and there's more information there in that user guide on exactly what's available, what will be available in the venous blood data.
Okay, so good transition to part 2. So we will take a pause with answering questions now, but please know again, we will email responses to questions we did not have time to get to after the webinar. Okay, so let me click on here to get into part 2. Back to you, Amanda.
All right, thanks, Judy. So now we're going to pivot to taking a quick tour through the website with some tips that will help you get started using the data. So this is a portal page designed to redirect study participants to their web page and researchers and others to the main website for the study. So let's click on that link. Of course, during this brief tour of the website, I'm not going to click on every link. I'll just walk you through some of the most important links for getting started with the data. There are many links of interest on this home page that are quick links to interior pages. So rather than reviewing them from these quick links, I'm going to cover many of them within the website. All right, let's begin with the About link. There are 10 links in the drop-down menu here. I'm just going to highlight 2 of them. First, we've put together a page called Getting Started, How to Use This Site that provides guidance on using the website similar to what we're doing right now. A second link in the About section I want to highlight is Partnerships and Collaborations. The main thing here I want to show you is the link to the International Sister Studies. You see at the top here is a link to the USC Gateway to Global Aging project I mentioned just before. this link takes you directly to their website. And as you can see, they also have an introductory webinar about the project that you can view at any time. So if you're interested in that cross-national comparative data, view their really good introductory webinar. So I'm going to go back to our website now. And you can see that we also have links to the websites of all of the HRS sister studies that have websites. Pretty sure at this point, every sister study that's available right now is represented here. So you can learn more about individual sister studies there. Now let's click on the documentation link. We're going to touch on each of these very briefly. Let's start with questionnaires. These are what we call box and arrow versions, which is to say just hard copy, but that term is a throwback term to the earliest days of survey research before computerization. There are two main sections on this page: questionnaires associated with the biennial core interview and those for the off-year and sensitive health information studies toward the bottom. You'll see that the biennial interview is broken up into content area sections, just as the interview itself is broken up into content area sections. As an aside, I want to note that when you download the data for any given wave of data, any given year, each section comes in a separate data file. So you'll get as many data files as you see sections here as part of the data download set. One thing to note here is that in some cases, the letter indicating which section is which has changed over the years. So that's just a heads up for you. Let's go ahead and click on section C, the health information for 2016. I want to call your attention to the information for the exit interviews that I mentioned, and that appears here in fuchsia, and in some of the earlier waves, it appears in gray, but either fuchsia or gray are the exit interview questions. Note that you can also find information that's preloaded into the questionnaire at the beginning. Then once you get to the questions, so that's a bunch of caddy information. Once you get to the questions, there's information that describes flow through the questionnaire, including these branch points. So I want to emphasize that I think it's really helpful to read through the questionnaire for any section of interest to you in order to understand who answers which questions. So the point here is that you'll wonder why maybe there isn't a complete sample for any particular question. And a helpful thing to do is to read through the questionnaire, see what the branch points are, and see why somebody might have gotten out of answering a particular question. Now I'm going to go back to the questionnaire page. I want to point out one more thing on this page in the biennial interview. So this core interview, some questions are not asked at every wave. At the top here, you see there's a link to a chart that shows which questions they are and which waves they are available. So this alternate wave questions master chart will tell you which are the questions that are not available every wave. So take a look at that sometime. Okay, now we're going to go back to documentation page and go to the code books. Every data product that HRS releases has a code book that provides frequency distributions on all variables in that data product. So let's click on the code book for the 2016 core again, and you'll see that it is organized by questionnaire section. Let's click on section C again, the health information, and you see that opens to another window. And on the left is a listing of all of the variables in this section. And then on the right are the frequency distributions for those variables. The variable name on the left is a hyperlink to the frequency distribution for that variable. So let's click on PC001, which is a variable name for self-rated health status. As you can see, this is a question with a 5-point response scale, and the numbers you see represent the number of respondents who answer each one of those responses in the 2016 wave. So for example, we had 1,222 people rate their health as excellent in 2016. Okay. Now I want to call out the importance of the data descriptions. Again, each data product in the HRS has a data description associated with it. Let's click on the data description for the 2016 core. I really can't overemphasize to you the importance of reading the data description for whatever product you're planning to use before you download and begin to use it. In particular, you'll see information here that describes the level of files available, the file naming conventions, important identification variables, and information on downloading the data. Okay, so you see those program statements there help you get started. The data are available in SAS, SPS, and Essence data, and that helps you get them downloaded and get going on analyzing them. So read the data descriptions, please. Okay, now I want to show you how to use the concordance tool. Concordance is a question search tool that helps you quickly see which questions are in which waves. So you can type what you're looking for in the search box. It's also a quick way to find out if HRS has content you're interested in. I'm going to use our example of self-rated health status. And I'm going to use quotation marks to search this exact phrase. So it's like any other search function where if you use quotation marks, you get that exact phrase. Otherwise, you get everything that's relevant to each word in your phrase. And I'm going to limit it as well to just 2014. I'll hit enter. And also, I wanted to note that the concordance tool has not yet been updated with 2016 information. So it'll only show you information through 2014. But the questionnaire has changed very little between 14 and 16. So if it's there in 14, it's very likely there in 16 as well. So clicking on the variable name would take you out to the code book that I just showed you, but we don't need to go there, but that's a hyperlink to the code book. The feature I did want to point out here is this cross-reference function in the row titled cross-wave equivalence. This shows you the other waves that this same variable is available along with the equivalent variable name. So this is super helpful, but although it's very helpful, I want to point out that it's not perfect. Variable names were inconsistent in the earlier waves, rationalized to a significant degree by the 2000 wave, but you should be slightly suspicious of these earlier waves. For example, self-rated health actually is in the 1992 and 1994 waves, but these waves don't appear on the cross-ref. But again, if you see it in 96, very good chance that it's in 92 and 94. So then you have to search specifically for that. Okay, so back to documentation, I want to point out some really helpful information under survey design. Here, this first link takes us to a table that represents the study and its contents as a whole. And I'll say that if you're just getting used to the study and learning about it, this is really your kind of a go-to thing for you because it represents the entire study, all of the waves and all of the kinds of data that are available. So all of the acronyms in the table are spelled out at the top. Then for each year below, you can see the biennial, off-year, sensitive health, restricted data, and derived data products that are available. And then each of these buttons takes you to an overview information page about that particular data product. So Tracker is an important data file that contains records for every respondent who ever participated, which you can see here. The N is 38,183 people. Tracker has in it a lot of information about what parts of flag variables that for what parts of the questionnaire people are assigned to. It has all of the basic demographic information in it for everyone who's ever participated. And then to the right are documentation links that are associated with Tracker. Okay, so let's go back to survey design. And we can scroll down to see a series of documents related to sample sizes and weights. And so that's important when you get that far. But most importantly, I want to point out to you these two documents under data analysis. They are very useful guides to getting started with HRS data management and data analysis. And even though, as you can see, they're older, the fundamental elements in these documents remains relevant. So they too are really your must reads for getting started with using HRS data. Okay, lastly, in the documentation section, I want to call your attention to a series of video tutorials, particularly the second one, which provides guidance on downloading the public data from the HRS website. So if you haven't ever downloaded data, I strongly recommend reading the data description for the files you're interested in, and then viewing this video, because it will give you, it's only 9 minutes, but it's a step-by-step guide to downloading the data from the public data from the website. Okay, so now I want to turn to the data products. Judy, are you on data products?
Yes, I am. Let me see if I can.
I think it's
faster. Let me see if it's.
I'm not seeing it yet, so.
All right, thank you. Please stand by. Let's work to restore this page here. Maybe an issue with our webinar technology, a small blip. Hopefully you see it now. Okay.
The excitement of live videos.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it yet.
No? Okay. See if I can refresh it one more time. How did that do?
I'm still on the video tutorials.
Okay. Let me see if I can shift it over here. How is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Great.
Okay. So here on the main page for data products, you'll see that the links are organized around 3 main categories of data: public, restricted and sensitive. So those are together, but there's 3 categories: public, restricted, and sensitive. If you haven't already, let me point out here at the toward the bottom of that first column that you can register to access the data. So you just fill out a form, and within a day or two, you'll get an email with a login, sometimes even the same day, with a login and a password. And then you'll be ready to start downloading data. But please be sure to read the conditions of use available on this registration page. It's not just a pro forma thing. There's actually some really useful information there. So read the conditions of use as you register. Now I just want to point out a few things on the public data page. Note that to the right, there's a navigation bar that shows you all the main categories available on the page. Most of the interior pages have this feature, this on this page feature, which is kind of nice. And I want to point out at this point that there is some redundancy on the HRS website. This is meant to be helpful, but can sometimes be a bit confusing. But I just want you to understand that there are several ways to access some of the HRS web pages, and this is one instance. So for each data product on this page, you'll see links to the relevant documentation for that data product, which of course you can also access on the documentation page. I also want to bring your attention to this More Info button, which we'll go ahead and click on. This is the overview information page I showed you earlier for Tracker, but this is for the 2016 core interview. So you can see there that it includes 16,296 respondents in 11,670 households. And then there's just some other information about this wave available there. So every data product has this details page. So back to the main data products page, a very good resource I want to recommend to you, especially for new users, is the RAND version of the HRS public data. Researchers at the RAND Corporation produced this processed version of some of the public data that does several important things that make using the data easier. First, they've renamed the variables so that they all follow the same naming convention across all waves. Second, they have constructed many variables such as household income and wealth, which would be extremely time-consuming for you to create on your own. So even advanced users of the data often pull down RAND and grab income and wealth from RAND rather than have to try to produce that on their own. Third, importantly, they've aggregated across content area sections. So you remember that I told you when you download the public data, you get all of the sections separately. So they've created FAT files for every given wave that are all of the waves or all of the sections aggregated. But then in version P, you would see on their website, they've aggregated across the content areas, but then across all of the waves. So the RAND version of the data, check it out, very easy to use. It's done a lot of your merging. But it's important to note that it does not contain all of the survey content. For example, it doesn't have any of the psychosocial information at this point. But it's a very good starting place, and it is it's great for some of the constructed variables. Okay, now I want to note that the biomarker and sensitive health data require an additional step to access beyond just registering. Specifically, access to any of these biomarker and health data products requires that you complete a data use agreement and a data order form. You email them to us, and then you get permission to use those data. So not a big hurdle, but one additional. Access to the restricted data, on the other hand, requires a more extensive application process, which we don't have time to get into today. But the main thing to realize is that there are two options: traditional licensing, where you get the data mailed to you, or the virtual desktop infrastructure, which is relatively new, VDI. Nearly all of the restricted data can be accessed through the VDI, so that should be your starting point. So all of the administrative data I mentioned earlier are products you can access here, but you can see that there are other products that may be of interest, such as detailed geographic, occupational information. So take a look through the restricted data to see what goodies might be of interest to you. Okay. So lastly, I want to show you the links under publications. Here in the drop-down menu, you can see that the last link is to archived versions of the user newsletter I mentioned earlier. So you can sign up to get new ones coming, but you can also get the 3 that we've produced so far. We keep track of all research products that use HRS data, and you can access them through our online bibliography. You will read in the conditions of use that we ask that you let us know when you produce any research using the data, and you can submit that information here as well. So I'm just going to point out some of the functionality of the online bibliography. First, you can see that there are currently 4,133 bibliography entries. And you can export the entire database if you want in various forms. RTF, rich text format, of course, will export directly to Word, so that's nice. On the left, you can see that the bibliography is sortable according to last name of the first author, title, type of publication, and year. To the right, you can see that there is an open text search. If you click on the author box, you will see a listing of all of the authors represented in the bibliography. And of course, then you can also limit your search by publication type, year of publication, and keyword. And as you do your searches, you'll see that the number under export results updates to the number that are available in your search. And just remember that you can always export the results of your search as an RTF file. Lastly, I want to point out that we include a link to the publication in PubMed or Google Scholar, which many times allows you to access the full text of the paper. Okay, so I want to end here today the formal part of the presentation by emphasizing that our help desk really is incredibly helpful. And there are no questions too big or too small, and certainly no stupid questions. So please, as you chart your journey with the HRS, do not hesitate to send us your questions by email at hrsquestions@umich.edu. So thank you for joining us today, and good luck with the data. And now I believe we have time for some more questions.
We do, and thank you, Amanda. On behalf of the Gerontological Society of America, really thank you very much for today's webinar. Just a reminder, everyone, we are recording the session, and we will send you an access link by email once the recording is available. You will also be able to download a copy of the presentation slides from today. And please save these 2 webinar dates for more information about HRS. There will be a webinar on the HRS cognition data on Tuesday, March 27th at noon Eastern Time, and a webinar on HRS biomarkers data on Tuesday, April 24th at noon Eastern Time. So please go to that website for more details. And before I move to the second question and answer portion of the program, please also know a webinar survey will automatically launch after the webinar. In an effort for continual improvement, we would like to hear your thoughts. So please provide feedback by clicking the survey link at the end of the webinar. All right, so now moving along to our second question and answer session. Again, please type your questions using the feature in the dashboard. And we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible before the clock strikes at the top of the hour. Okay, and questions are coming in, Amanda. Let me start. I'm just gonna pick one here.
All
okay.
Right.
Is there a way to obtain average age of the sample for a given year?
Well, sure. So you can certainly just, I'd say, so you can certainly download the core data for any particular wave. I was trying to think of kind of some easier ways, because age is available in Tracker, but that's for everyone. But yeah, you would download data for any given wave and just run a mean on the age variable. The RAND version of the data file that I mentioned, it's called RAND version P. When you click through on that link, you'll get this version P data file, which is the one that I said has the data aggregated across waves. And I forget what the var name is, but for example, for the respondent's age for wave 1, 1992, I think it's like R1 age. And then an interesting thing to know about age is that because we have approximately a 10-month or sometimes longer field period, RAND creates age variables for the age the respondent was at the beginning of the field period, the middle of the field period, and the end of the field period. So most people, and I do certainly, just choose that middle of the field period age when I use age. But if you downloaded the RAND version, you could kind of pretty quickly just run a quick, if you're in Stata, just a quick tab stat on the age varies.
Great.
You get age.
What is the process to gaining access to the data? What restrictions are there for using the data for publication? Are there specific processes to go through before moving forward with using the data for academic writing and publishing?
So again, we have 3 categories of data, and the vast majority of the data are what we call public, the public data. And as I said, the bulk of that is from this core interview. And there are no restrictions on using that data. Again, the only condition, you must read the conditions of use when you register. largely speaking, those data have been masked and de-identified so that they're public. There's no risks to the confidentiality that we offer respondents to you using those public data. So your only hurdle is to register. You register by filling out a form, and then we send you, usually within the day, certainly the next day, a login and a password. You go back to that registration page where it says new user, or registered users. You click on that registered users, you put in your login information, and then you are right into the data download site, and you are ready to go downloading the data. For the sensitive health information, you have only just to fill out these extra forms. The restricted data requires a more detailed process, and I would refer you to the website to read about that. It's all just forms, but in particular for that virtual desktop infrastructure, you need to have somebody from your computing unit come and approve your workstation. That is, it has to be in a room that has a door that closes. Because in other words, when you connect to we have an enclave where the restricted data live here, brick and mortar place, and you're connecting to a workstation in that enclave. So then your office becomes like an enclave. So a little bit more hurdles, but nothing that keeps you from registering today, downloading the data, and get going analyzing.
Mm-hmm. Super. Here's one. What are the differences between the raw HRS data and the version such as that provided by RAND?
Great question. So, as I said, by the 2000 wave, we really got our act together and rationalized a system for naming the variables. But really, prior to 1998, it's a little hairy, where the variable names kind of have very different names, and it's kind of confusing with how different, and that the naming convention is not perfectly consistent. So the so-called raw data, when Judy was clicking on in our tour of the website, all those things for like the core 2016, anything that's core, that is what you would refer to as the raw data. And they're completely unprocessed. Well, they're processed for a certain amount of data cleaning, but you have your 8s and your 9s in there, and you're missing data, and so you have to do a little bit of cleaning up of the data before you're ready to analyze. The RAND version has done quite a lot of that cleaning for you, and these constructed variables are super helpful. I mean, the income and wealth are the most helpful, but they've also done a lot of, like I said, cleaning and processing of the age variable so that it's beginning, middle, and end. They've created a 5-category race variable. They've created a 5-category educational variable if you want. They've created a lot of nice variables, so it's processed already. And then of course the big difference is they created this file that's already merged, because you have a big job to do initially, merging the different sections of any given questionnaire, and then merging across waves. And that's where those documents under data analysis by Marita Surveys, they are really helpful for your merging cross wave longitudinally. So I will tell you that for myself, what I do is I often start with Tracker and with RAND, and I grab the data that I want from there. I'll grab virtually all of my demographic data from RAND, and then I start merging in what I need from the raw data. So you can start with RAND. If it's not in RAND, then you can go to your raw data. If you're super jockey data analyst, use all the raw data if you like, but a lot of people start with RAND. I certainly do. and then I pull in from the raw data what is not available to me in RAND.
That was a great question, and I'm afraid we have run out of time. So Amanda, it has been a real pleasure again. Thank you very much. Oh, good. And I'll actually we'll thank everyone for participating. Hope everyone has a great day, and this is the end of the program.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.